In science fiction, the keys to having a good kickoff to a franchise are setting a tone and some solid world building. The key to putting a halt to that franchise is to take all that you've built up, go a completely different direction, and hope that no one notices. Oh, we noticed. But in the case of the Chronicles of Riddick, we can overlook all of that because in truth, it's not that bad. Welcome to It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A, great, and B, movies. And I'm not gonna lie, when this movie that we're about to talk about was pitched to me, it's like, hey, you know what? I've never actually watched a single movie in the Riddick franchise, which is personally a little shocking because I'm a massive sci-fi geek. So when Cullen Munch hopped on Twitter and said, hey, have you ever watched the Chronicles of Riddick? I'm like, no. I looked it up and all of a sudden I'm like, now I want to go to there. And joining the show for the first time is Cullen Munch. Cullen, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, and I am thrilled to be here, especially talking about this franchise.
So what is it about the Chronicles of Riddick that made you want to pitch this film?
It's that this movie, while yes, it's bad, it doesn't deserve like the schlock that it gets from people. It doesn't deserve like the rating that it gets from people. It's a dumb science fiction movie, but it's no worse than so many other movies that people rate much more highly. And it is a complete Vin Diesel vanity project, which I just cannot wait to get into.
Well, if you're describing this as dumb science fiction movie, you have come to the right place. That's kind of my jam, and so I'm really happy to go down this road. But before we talk about the Chronicles of Riddick, it is time to take this, as you say, Vin Diesel vanity project and trailerize it.
He is the last of his kind. A man considered a criminal by some, a hero to others, and feared by those who wish to seek to enslave the world. No, it's not Doctor Who. We aren't that lucky. The voice of Groot goes from Diesel to unleaded in the sequel to Pitch Black, The Chronicles of Riddick. The man who can't stand the light brings a dark mood in this 180 shift in tone from its predecessor, making us all wish Hollywood could learn to leave well enough alone. It's a film that borrows the feel from so many other movies in a way that makes you wish that you watched those movies instead. The Chronicles of Riddick, rated R, or PG-13, depends on which one you watched.
That was fantastic.
In all honesty, it actually isn't that bad. I know I recognize I just said the title of the show, but really, there's a lot to talk about this film, but let's do the breakdown of this one here. This film stars, returning from the original Pitch Black, Vin Diesel and Keith David, but also new to the franchise, Tandy Newton, Carl Urban, Colm Feore, and I can't believe I'm saying this about a science fiction film, Dame Judi Dench, which is kind of surprised me.
Judi Dench.
Judi Dench in a sci-fi film is worth at least 10 critic points alone, I would say.
I mean, there are mysteries out there in the universe. There's like, who's actually behind the Kennedy assassination? There's, like, who built the pyramids? I want to know, more than most of those things, what Vin Diesel said to Judi Dench to get her to be in this movie. It's one of those things that, like, I cannot believe she's in this. Like, she brings so much gravitas and greatness to it just by the virtue of being Dame Judi Dench. But I seriously cannot picture or comprehend what happened there.
Aside from her being on the first season of Staged with David Tennant and Michael Sheen, this might be the greatest thing Judi Dench has ever done. So I'm kind of putting it out there right now. I was a fan of this. However, there is an almost starring in this one here. If you watched Pitch Black and then watched this and you had that sense of what the fuck is going on. Part of that might be the fact that the person who plays Jack, or at least now renamed as Kira, is not the same person as it was in the first film. Rihanna Griffith actually had to audition to reprise her very own role. And Vin Diesel was apparently no, you can do this, but you just need to toughen up. She didn't toughen up. Alexa Davalos got the role. Also, Linus Roach, who plays the Purifier, actually auditioned for the role of Vaco, which eventually went to Carl Urban. But David Twohy, the director, thought he was a great Purifier, and so we got that. This is written and directed by David Twohy. He has directed all the Riddick films. He also directed The Arrival, starring Charlie Sheen. However, it was almost directed because under consideration for this film. Imagine this film as directed by one of these names: Guillermo del Toro, David Cronenberg, Alex Proyas, John Landis for some reason, and Peter Jackson. They were, according to IMDb, all under consideration, but instead they went back to the source, to the original David Twohy.
They went back to the OG David Twohy.
Exactly.
Wait.
Now,
Peter
interestingly
Jackson and Guillermo del Toro.
I mean, Guillermo del Toro, I could actually see making sense. Cronenberg,
I can see Guillermo del Toro, absolutely, but Peter Jackson, that's crazy.
It's the John Landis that really throws it out there for me. I'm like, what?
John Landis.
I mean, don't get me wrong. These are all phenomenal directors, but John Landis doing the Chronicles of Riddick?
Doing a sci-fi follow-up to Pitch Black that bears little resemblance to Pitch Black. Just following up on David Twohy, I also want to point out that he also wrote The Fugitive. Mm-hmm. And G.I. Jane and Waterworld. Yeah,
we're talking aside from Waterworld, we're talking some very, very good films here.
Right.
But here's the interesting thing. Found this little nugget on IMDb. So after Pitch Black proved to be a success on DVD, and I'm now quoting from IMDb here, apparently Universal became interested in making a sequel because when something makes money, Hollywood says, yes, I want more of that. So David Twohy wrote the screenplays for 3 sequels. 3. He put them in separate leather binders, and he gave them all to Universal with the key only for the first one. That's ballsy.
That is so crazy. Wow.
Now, keep in mind, too, there was a Riddick film that came out in 2013, and apparently in development is a film called Furia. It is the story of when Riddick finds his homeworld. It's in development. This is probably the 3rd folder that was handed to them. I am fascinated by this. Who hands them 3 folders, says, okay, first taste is free, but you got to pay for the other 2.
But you got to pay me to unlock one of these folders to get these Riddick sequels.
This feels like let's make a deal in Hollywood, right? You have 3 folders and 1 key. What's in the box? If you open the wrong folder, can you imagine the film they would have made? Oh dear God! There's a story in here that I want that movie made. That's fascinating. But as most things Vin Diesel, they're going to get noticed by the Razzies here. And at the 25th annual Razzies, Vin Diesel was nominated for Worst Actor. He lost to George W. Bush for Fahrenheit 9/11. Also,
oh, wow.
Yeah. Also, at the 2004 Stinker Movie Awards, Diesel was nominated for Worst Actor again. He lost to Ben Affleck for Jersey Girl and Surviving Christmas. And we've already defended Jersey Girl on this show. So, you know. But part of that probably affected the budget. According to IMDb, this film has a budget of $105 million. Domestically, it only grossed 57.7 with a worldwide gross of almost 116 million. When it was released on the June 11th, 2004 weekend, it was up against tough company because number one that week. For its second week, rightfully so, was Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Chronicles of Riddick debuted at number 2 with a take of $24 million. There were 2 other debuting movies out there that weekend that weren't going to come close. The Stepford Wives debuted at number 5 with $21 million. And Garfield the Movie nudged it out at number 4 with $21.7 million. But, I mean, that's a good weekend at the box office when you have the top 6 films: Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Chronicles of Riddick, Shrek 2 at number 3, Garfield, The Stepford Wives, and The Day After Tomorrow, which had $15.5 million in its third week. That's a lot of money at the box office. It's a good week. And Chronicles of Riddick debuted well, but I wonder how much of that is just based on the fact that Pitch Black really, truly and honestly was one of those cult classic films. So I'm assuming that you saw both of them in the theater when they came out.
I saw Chronicles of Riddick when it came out. I saw Pitch Black on like DVD or VHS. It was one of those things that was passed around and like, oh, you've got to see this. And I loved Pitch Black. I still love Pitch Black. And honestly, it is a better movie. Mm-hmm. But that's not to say that Chronicles of Riddick is horrible. It's just, it's not as good as Pitch Black. But I did see Chronicles of Riddick in the theater.
Pitch Black is definitely one of those films that, you know, it had that feel of something you were going to discover on DVD because it's not big, it's not splashy, it's very compact. It's almost like one of those, I almost want to call it a phone booth type film where everything happens in a very small area, and that kind of adds to, like, it's a tense movie. Like, they did a lot with a little in that film, and it worked. This one, we're going to get to this in a little bit, but this one went the completely opposite direction, whereas Pitch Black was
exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah, it was a very small film, self-contained to the small cast in Pitch Black, and then all of a sudden you have the entire universe at play, and somehow Dame Judi Dench in the sequel. Like, how?
And there's so much going on, to the point of, like, this movie has, if anything, too many ideas. Like, that there is too much that is happening in here to where you're like, okay, yeah, I can kind of follow what's happening, but it's jarring and disorienting to watch this movie.
And that jarring and disorienting feel probably led to the critic score, which is why we are here. Over at Metacritic, this has a Metascore of 38. The audience score for this film over on Rotten Tomatoes is 65%. The tomatometer, 20. You have a 45% swing from audience to critic. And, you know, we've said it on this show before, where genre fiction tends to get a bad rap when it comes to critics. I mean, it takes a lot to blow a critic out of the water when it comes to traditional science fiction. I mean, you take a look at films like Valerian, which does actually qualify for this show. Tron Legacy qualifies for this show. These are good films, but critics traditionally look at, you know, especially science fiction and horror. They tend to kind of look at those with the side eye, go, no, I got to watch this kind of thing. So for the audience score, because really sci-fi is one of those genres for the audience, what is it about this film that made them actually appreciate this to the point of a 65% score?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if 65% is quite accurate. Like, if I were to rank this, I might give it more of like a 58 or 59. Mm-hmm. Like, it's okay. Like, it certainly doesn't deserve like the 20 that it gets from the critics. But I think the 60% comes from the things in this film that are super enjoyable, that it has an incredibly stacked cast. You've got Carl Urban before he's Carl Urban. You've got Thandie Newton before she's Thandie Newton. You've got Keith David. You've got, you know, Vin Diesel doing his Vin Diesel thing. And a lot of these people absolutely know what movie they're in, especially Thandie Newton, who is just swinging for the fences with this Lady Macbeth performance that she turns in. was the
I love that you say that everyone knows what they're doing. Judi Dench has said in an interview, she was quoted as saying that she didn't know much of what was going on in the story, but she had a good time filming it. So
yes,
I kind of like that even more.
She said she didn't know what was happening, like what the movie was about, but she had a good time making it, and she thought the sets were nice.
Which that could be said about a lot of films that will probably end up on this show. But let's get to the breakdown of this. And we have to talk about Bruno here. Richard Bruno Riddick as played by Vin Diesel. So what's your take on the transition from Riddick from Pitch Black to this film?
It's purely Vin Diesel doing his thing in the early 2000s of Vin Diesel being like, oh, I'm going to, by sheer force of will, transform myself into a giant movie star. Like, I'm going from the Fast and the Furious franchise to this, to whatever else I can. But this one, I think, much more being his passion project, because if you know Vin Diesel, you know that he is like a not so closeted nerd. He loves science fiction. He loves fantasy. He is an adamant D&D player. Apparently, on the set of this movie, there was a D&D game going on between setups between Vin Diesel, Judi Dench, Carl Urban, and Thandie Newton. But so this is just Vin Diesel saying, like, I was in this Pitch Black movie. I like this character. I like this world. I'm going to try to bring as much of this out as I can with this other movie starring the same character, and I'm just going to make it be me. It's just Vin Diesel being Vin Diesel in a way that is like enjoyable to a certain extent, but also you're just like, okay, you're just Vin Diesel.
I think the interesting thing about the transition is that, you know, as I watched Pitch Black, and this is the interesting thing, like, because I admit I had never seen any of the Riddick films before literally yesterday, as I'm preparing for the show, because I'm like, as I'm watching Chronicles of Riddick, and I watched it first, I'm like, this is a fascinating movie. There's a lot of really good world building here. I have questions, but I mean, I love the scale and epicness of it. And then I watch Pitch Black. I'm like, this is a different franchise entirely. And as you're watching Pitch Black, the first film, you know, he's this, I can't even say anti-hero. He's just this big question mark.
He's more of a horror character.
Yeah.
Like he's like a monster at the beginning of Pitch Black.
He's an enigma as far as the overall story goes. And I love the fact that, yes, he's doing his best to, to help out Jack, kind of thing. Because, I mean, obviously he's not a monster per se, especially
right. He's overtaken by the actual monsters that take over in that movie.
Well, yes, and the funny thing is, because of the questions about the bounty hunter that's actually captured him that gets revealed in the film. By the way, we're going to spoil the crap out of these movies for you, but Pitch Black is over 20 years old, and this film came out in 2004. So if you haven't seen it by now, like I was, go ahead and watch them, but just be forewarned, you will. We're going to spoil the crap out of it. But it's like, all of a sudden, everyone's personality is in question except for Imam, played by Keith David, and of Jack. You don't know which way it's going to go, because they had zero problem killing off all these characters that would probably normally make it off the planet alive. So to see him actually to go through this, and it left off at such a very interesting point. Now all of a sudden, here he is. He's on the run for more bounty hunters. That kind of makes sense. But it's gone from being an enigma of a character to all of a sudden Riddick is this, bigger than life superhero. You also have to think too that there might have been a little bit of Vin Diesel fatigue going on at the time. And we've talked about this on this show and on my other show, Just Another Nerd Show, especially with Dwayne Johnson, where there's so much of them all at the same time. right? You mentioned it, Pitch Black, and then Triple X, and Fast and the Furious, and there was even Knockaround Guys that came out before this.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Forgot about it, or have blocked it out of your memory? One of the two.
A little of both, probably.
It can be both. It can be both. But I mean, really, Vin Diesel in the early 2000s, he was absolutely everywhere. And then after this film, I mean, there were a couple of films, but it really felt like he kind of disappeared for a little bit. And then, of course, the Fast and Furious became what it became. And you have to wonder if, a little bit of Vin Diesel fatigue affected the critic score at this point.
You do, and you also have to think that, like, this movie is, like, such a jarring difference from Pitch Black. I mean, as you've already kind of mentioned, it like Pitch Black is like such a tight, contained story with a bunch of like small characters. This movie is just like, oh, you like that world? Let's take that world and do all of it. Let's just go as far as we can with the very concept of this world.
But even interestingly, I mean, again, like there are some franchises, and I'm using air quotes as I say this here, where there are movies in it where you can tell it's a spec script and then they shoehorn something in. American Psycho 2 is not an American Psycho film. They just kind of shoehorned in a very, very, very loose sort of pseudo tie-in so they could put the American Psycho, name on it and try and sell it off. It should never have been listed as an American Psycho film. Some of the Hellraiser films are like that, where it is very much a spec script and then let's put Pinhead in there somehow. This film, at least as far as the grand scheme of things, it still feels, while it is a much grander, epic scale of a film, it at least still feels like it should be in that universe. And I think having Keith David return as a mom to kind of, tie up that storyline and at least connect with the people who lived. I mean, having Keith David in anything, really, I'm not going to lie, I'm a big Keith David fan.
Having Keith David at all is always a bonus to a movie, but you're exactly right. Like having Keith David to tie it back to the first movie, having even the character of Jack, although we quickly transfer Jack into being Kira and like there's little to no resemblance to the character of Jack, but the fact that he's still following up on these characters from the first movie gives us, some tie to it, which feels good in a way that this movie also like is taking that world and expanding it, but it has us tied to the first film with these characters.
Mm-hmm. I actually think that Keith David was better in this than he was in Pitch Black. I need to put this out there. A mom in Pitch Black was very much almost a just basically a bunch of cliches of people of Muslim faith, right? And as much as I love Keith David, I'm like, this feels odd. Here in Chronicles of Riddick, he feels like a much more grounded character. He doesn't feel like a stereotype, if you will.
You're exactly right. Like he feels so much more real in Chronicles of Riddick because you're getting to see him with his family. You're getting to see him like actually protecting something beyond his faith. He's not just a stand-in for his faith, which he kind of is in the first movie, where it's like, oh, here's the character who's like the definition of this character is that he's a Muslim. Like in Chronicles of Riddick, there's like, oh, here's this guy, he's a Muslim, but he has a wife and he has a child and he's trying to protect them, and he has this debt that he owes to Riddick because Riddick saved his life, and he feels like such a more real and rounded character in Chronicles of Riddick.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, and again, spoiler alert here, having Keith David die the way he did, it actually gives weight not to the motivation for Riddick, but it gives credence to the threat that the Necromongers pose, not just to Helios Prime, but to the universe. Like, he needed to die in order for the Necromongers to be the threat that they are.
Yeah, and I mean, we had to see the Necromongers like actually do the thing that they talk about, which is like to, conquer an entire world and convert everyone on that world into their, twisted religion or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, as the Necromongers were doing their thing, how much did you have to withhold screaming out, Borg! They're the Borg!
Oh, they are so much the Borg. It's so wild how much they are the Borg. But while we're on that, the Lord Marshal of the Necromongers is played by one of those character actors who's in a million things. A guy named Cullen Munch, who just is in so much stuff. And I challenge you to do something that is going to bring limitless joy and happiness into your life. Whenever you see Cullen Munch in something, I just want you out loud to say, I have seen the Underverse! Cullen Munch will pop up in the West Wing as, a guy who works for the State Department. Just say, I have seen the Underverse! Cullen Munch will pop up as some other random character. Just out loud, every time you see Cullen Munch pop up in something, say that, and you will just be delighted.
I will say, he chews up the scenery every time he's on screen. Absolutely. And one of the things I always find interesting about actors who have clearly taken the stage, as I'm sure he has in his past, when it comes to movie villains, I find that there are two kind of paths they can go down. There is stage villain and screen villain. Screen villain is more, not necessarily a dialed back performance, but a performance that is basically built around where the camera angle is, the mood that's being set at the time, the light. It's an almost atmospheric villain. Stage villain is I'm going to be very loud and very obviously the bad guy. And if you go back to like the Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd, Armand Assante is as Rico is so much a stage villain as opposed to a screen villain. Yeah, Heath Ledger as the Joker. That was screen villain, very much so, because there was a lot of, quick changes, subtle nods, all this kind of stuff. Like, you didn't know which way he was going to go, but a lot of it was based on how he was framed and how, the scene in general. Cullen Munch, just total stage villain in this. But I kind of enjoy it because as we got to see the Necromongers, we joked around about the Necromongers basically being Borg. But after they take over Helios Prime and everyone is kind of brought into that room, I got some heavy Dune vibes from watching this scene. Like, as you're watching this, what was your thought on the Necromongers as a whole?
Like, Dune is one of those blind spots for me in science fiction. I have never actually seen or read it. So to me, it was very much the Borg. Like we had already talked about, it was very much like, okay, here come this like overwhelming force that's going to, come through and like absolutely strip everything from your planet and make you into them. And it's like, I really like them as this existential threat. It's wild that we go so late into the movie before we establish like that they are the threat of the movie. But I still really like them. I like Cullen Munch chewing the scenery. I like Carl Urban. I love Thandie Newton, who's also just chewing the scenery as much as she possibly can.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the thing with the Necromongers is, and we'll get to Carl Urban and Thandie Newton in a second here, but the thing with the Necromongers is there's clearly a hierarchy. There's clearly a much grander story that can be told about them because you have a lot of, not necessarily political infighting, but definitely a lot of almost Game of Thrones-esque power struggle, internal power, the entire line of you keep what you kill. There is such a rich story that could be told of the Necromongers that as I'm watching the Chronicles of Riddick, I'm like, I can only imagine the grandness of this franchise if this movie came first. If Pitch Black didn't exist and this movie was there, like right out on Front Street, people would be like, this is a big universe. And I really like this. Like, I think it introduced the Necromongers in a very interesting way. I mean, there are aspects of Thanos in here as well, as far as like trying to, take over the everything. But I mean, I just wish we could explore more of that and instead of spending so much time on this prison planet, just focused on Riddick. I wanted to know more about them. Carl Urban and Thandie Newton, because of the dynamic between the two, this is where that Game of Thrones political maneuvering comes into play, because the two of them really were almost like a self-contained unit trying to usurp power in their own way. But as you're watching this, I mean, you've been talking about Thandie Newton basically since we started the show, and I will say, you're right. She dances in this. She seems to be having a ton of fun here.
She's having so much fun. Like, you can tell that, like, I mean, it's kind of what I already said, that she knows exactly what movie she's in, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna go for it. Like, this is gonna be this weird sci-fi movie with this. I mean, exactly like you were talking about, like the Necromongers are the thing that's interesting about it. And I am part of the political intrigue of this. I'm literally playing a character who is Lady Macbeth. So let me just go whole hog and just act like acting act in this movie as Lady Macbeth.
I mean, as I'm watching her, two things come to mind. First one is if this movie was made today, that role is played by Zoe Saldana. You could very much see
Absolutely.
how that whole Gamora vibe is kind of put into this. But to the same token as well, watching this, you tell me Thandie Newton wouldn't have made a wonderful Catwoman in that era.
She would have made such a good Catwoman in that era. I did not even think of that. But I also love the idea that you just brought up of imagining this movie made at a different time, because that was something that came to my mind, because this movie it's schlock. It's kind of, like, not necessarily cheaply made, but it looks cheap, and it's, it's made for the ego of this person. It kind of reminds me of a Cannon movie. Like, so if this movie had been made in 1986, it would have been a Cannon movie, and it probably would have starred like either like Chuck Norris or Jean-Claude Van Damme. I think Jean-Claude Van Damme would have been the better choice. But just imagine this movie produced by Menachem Golan and starring Jean-Claude Van Damme coming out in 1986.
The thing is, though, I mean, say what you will about Cannon films, and I have said a lot about Cannon films on this podcast over the past, over a year. But you go back and you take a look at Masters of the Universe, and as campy as that film is, there is a deliciousness to the villain, but there's also, I mean, the girl who plays Evil Lynn in that one is phenomenal. There's a lot of Evil Lynn from Masters of the Universe in Lady Vaco, as played by Thandie Newton, where there's
100%. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
And again, as much as you want to say about Masters of the Universe, but the Castle Grayskull setting, like the scenery in that, the set design of that, it's huge. It's like, Flash Gordon from 1980 with Sam J. Jones. That Ming's throne room is a glorious set. And, say what you will about the 2004 CGI in the space battles and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, it didn't feel like bad CGI to me, like some of the films of that time. Like even Green Lantern looked way worse than this. This was moody. I think the darkness helped hide some of the CGI as far as the Necromongers and their ships go. But it was stylishly done. I didn't hate this at all.
Yeah, I mean, like the CGI, like no CGI ages well, especially CGI from like the early 2000s. But I mean, it looks okay, and it's because it's backed up by like such good practical stuff. I mean, again, the sets, like the actual huge practical real sets that are built in this movie are fantastic. They've got this crazy spooky aesthetic to them, and it all works. Like we've already gotten to this, and I'm sure we'll get back to it. But the problem is that we don't spend enough time with the Necromongers. We spend too much time with the prison planet.
Mm-hmm. I think we also didn't spend enough time in really discovering Vaco, as played by Carl Urban. Now, look, you yourself had mentioned this, right? I mean, despite the fact that he was in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I mean, this is pre-Star Trek Carl Urban. This is pre-Judge Dredd Carl Urban. Although watching him early on in this film, you could see where, why they'd say, oh no, he'll be a good Judge Dredd. This is pre-The Boys Carl Urban. But the problem is, though, his motivation in this isn't really explored so much. It's almost like he's a tool for Lady Vaco as far as gaining power amongst the Necromongers. Carl Urban, unfortunately, his character development is, hey, we're the baddies.
Yes. Carl Urban is just like, I am the dutiful soldier. I'm the bad guy. I love my wife. My wife is super ambitious. My wife wants me to become the new head of the bad guys. And that's his entire character.
I mean, you saw a little bit of it at the beginning as they're bringing all these people in, and Thandie Newton is, kind of being somewhat flirtatious to other people and all that, and he mentions something about her ambition kind of thing, and she's like, you're my only ambition, husband, kind of thing. And it's like, oh, this is an interesting dynamic. I want more of these characters. I really, really do. Like, Carl Urban as Vaco needs to be explored more. I haven't seen the 20, I think it was like released in 2013. I haven't seen that Riddick. Apparently they go back to the pitch black planet there. So, but I want more of this. There's a lot to unpack out of this world building. I need more of it.
I have to be honest, as much as I do enjoy this franchise and I'm a defender of this film, I also have not seen Riddick. I have not seen the 2013 movie.
Okay. We have to now talk about Dame Judi Dench. I can't believe we're talking about a movie with Judi Dench on this show, considering what movies qualify for this podcast. You said it best. Like, she brings so much gravitas to Arion, the elemental in this. I don't know if you needed someone of that caliber, but apparently Vin Diesel like petitioned hard to get her on, to the point of like every day in her dressing room or whatever, there were like, multiple bouquets of flowers on, Vin Diesel fought to get her on this film, and I think the film is actually that much better for it.
Yeah, because also, he fights so hard to get her, but then he's smart enough once he has her to know to use her to full advantage. So if we're going to have some, voiceover to try and explain the boatload of exposition that is required for this film, we're going to have Judi Dench do that because we've got Judi Dench.
And there's the thing, if you have someone of that caliber, let them be regal. Let them be just, almost the fact that apparently her dress was made out of crushed up Swarovski crystals, like you clearly, but to the same token as well, I again draw parallels to Masters of the Universe. Right? There's that, and I can't remember the character name, but she's trapped in Grayskull while He-Man is stuck on Earth, kind of thing. This is that kind of character. I just wish it was explored a little bit more why the elementals were so afraid of the Necromongers, what they knew about Riddick and his species. Like, Arion knows a lot. She doesn't say much about what she knows. We know that she has concerns about it. Again, we need more.
That's kind of the entire problem with this movie, is that it's got like some really fun, good world building around it, but it's all kind of nibbling at the edges of this world. Like, nothing ever gets fully explained or fully developed. Like, we never actually dive into anything aside from maybe a little bit the Necromongers, but not really even enough. It's all just like, hey, here's a world that looks kind of cool. Let's move on to the next thing. And you're so intrigued by the world that they're halfway setting up that you want like more of it. But this movie just can't quite. This movie and this entire franchise kind of can't quite deliver on the promise. Not to say that that's that bad, because you can enjoy like looking at these sets and these characters and like it being like a fun, dumb science fiction romp. But it what's disappointing about it is that you want more from it.
Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, I mean, you say fun, dumb science fiction romp. I don't know if I'd call it a dumb romp though. Fun, definitely. But I think the dumb is kind of erased away by actors like Linus Roche, who plays the Purifier. Here's a guy who, in his limited screen time, was able to develop so many questions about his motivation, about the hold of the Necromongers once the conversion has taken place, once the pledge to the Necromonger way has been, and when he dies.
His death scene is incredibly moving and powerful, and like he's got the like it's crazy like how much this guy brings to this death scene in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And apparently some of that was actually improv. Like he brought that to the table here, especially the line, "I've done unbelievable things in the name of a faith that was never my own."
That was never my own.
Yeah, hit that soliloquy as he's about to walk out into the burning sun. Apparently, he wanted to kind of have this be his Rutger Hauer from Blade Runner death scene, and it sticks the landing so well to the point of the Purifier maybe one of the more interesting Necromongers of the whole thing, and he's not even really in charge.
Yeah, he's like a third tier character within the power structure there, but he's the most like intriguing character a lot because of these questions that he brings. Like even earlier, he's asking Falco, like, do you ever have doubts? Like, do you ever like have doubts about the Lord Commander, about our mission and all this stuff? And Falco, just being the soldier, is like, if you're trying to test me, all you're doing is testing my patience. But you get a sense from him that it's like, no, he's not testing you. He really doesn't believe in this.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, every evil army has to have a chink in the armor, and in order for the hero to become victorious. Purifier is definitely that chink in the armor. He's the doubt in the belief system of the Necromongers, and it was just played absolutely beautifully. Let's move on away from the Necromongers to Alexa Davalos, who takes over the role of Jack / Kira and is in that prison planet. I have questions here. Because as I'm watching Pitch Black, and it has nothing to do with the actor change at all. I think Alexa Davalos had a great role in this. I know she kind of patterned Kira / Jack after Amy Lee and Evanescence, and if you think about 2004, yeah, that's a good way to go. But the whole thing was that she was mad at him because he left them behind. Am I missing something here? No.
It the part where the movie like starts to not work is when when he finally tries to track down Jack, and he goes to the prison planet, and it's like he's locked in the prison. And like this is where they're trying to tie it into the Chronicles of Riddick video game, which had came out between Pitch Black and Chronicles of Riddick, where it's like Riddick like escaped from Butcher Bay, where like, okay, well, we have to get like Riddick into a prison, and he has to break out of a prison, but the fact that like Jack is there and she's mad at him because like he abandoned them, but so she went to prison for like this, that, and the other. She signed up with a group of mercenaries. Like none of this stuff adds up or makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's
the
part where the movie falls apart.
I do recognize that there was the video short there, Chronicles of Riddick, Dark Fury, that was released, and it was Escape from Butcher Bay was the video game you were talking about there. But yeah, like, you know, because I watched this in reverse order, there was a lot of backstory to Jack that I loved the fact that I was questioning the morality of Riddick. And then I watched Pitch Black. I'm like, but he saved her. What happened in between? I mean, I get that, you know, that conflict helps a little bit, but it did leave me with more questions than I had answers. And it's a shame because I love what Alexa Davalos did with Kira, and the fact that, you know, her anger towards Riddick put Riddick's motives in question. But to the same token as well, you know, we also know that Kira has become a very damaged person while, you know, before, basically what it took to get her into that prison. Like, it's, you know, there's a lot more. I keep finding myself saying I want more. I think I'm basically asking for a Chronicles of Riddick TV series. I think that would have been the way to go.
I think that's exactly the problem. Is that this universe, like this character, all this lends itself better to a TV series than it does to a film franchise. Because it's so much about the world building, it's so much about like this character that it would be better served by a whole bunch of short stories than it is by, you know, a handful of longer stories.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, like this movie on its own, like, put Pitch Black aside. Put all the precursor stuff aside. There's wonderful world building in here. You have an enemy that is a galactic universal threat, not just because of their technology and their might, but because of their belief system. And when you have an enemy that believes so strong in their cause, it's hard to defeat them. You have chinks in the armor as proven by the Purifier. You have chinks in the hierarchy as proven by the Vakos. I wanted more world building. The action stuff, Riddick's, subsequent, getting stuck in this prison and then the subsequent getting out of it. Like, that's fun action. But it took away from the grander threat to the universe. I mean, that prison thing, that's one episode of a series.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile,
Riddick, like on the ice planet, escaping from the mercenaries is like an episode of the series. There's like him. We could have like whole episodes of the series that are just about the Necromongers. It's so much more a TV series than it is a movie.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if it exists out there, but if there was ever a Riddick novel series where it explored, like where you had the room to explore the world and the ideals and the hierarchy of the Necromongers, of this threat that basically, and the reason why they're so afraid of Vin Diesel and his kind, like the whole, why are the Furians so feared by them? That part's unexplored too.
Other than the prophecy, other than that the Lord Marshal like went to see some like clairvoyant or seer who told him that he would be killed by a Furian. So like that's why he's trying to eliminate the Furian race and why there's this fear of the Furians. But yeah, there's so much more room for expansion there.
Also, the whole scene where these random, all-knowing, all-seeing female voice caskets come out and basically start to explain, kill the Fury and kill the Riddick. I'm like, oh, good. We've switched to Minority Report. Okay, no problem.
Yes.
I mean, yes, obviously we know that there are only so many stories in the world and you are going to find similarities to other films no matter what. This felt like a lot of good parts that are pulled from different franchises and different movies. put into a much larger world. I mean, yes, admittedly, if you sit there and point at the things and go, oh, this is that, this is that, this is that, it's not going to feel like an original movie, but really there is no such thing as a completely original film. I think this one does well, though, in the world building aspect. However, that being said, there's one cast member I want to boot off the island here. And that is Nick Chinlund, as played by Toombs.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Nick Chinlund playing Toombs, not as played by Toombs.
Nick Chinlund as Toombs.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. There's a lot of... I keep also thinking about the first Thor film. And that being said, if Richard Branagh ever directed a Chronicles of Riddick series with the Necromongers, he'd be the perfect director in order to be able to flush out that kind of backstory of that race. But Toombs just feels almost that very early to mid 2000s over the top bad guy character that you just can't wait to, for him to get his comeuppance.
Yeah. You know what he is? He's the exact same character that he plays in Ultraviolet, which I don't know if you've had the misfortune of seeing Ultraviolet, but it's a Mila Jovovich movie where he is the bad guy in this dystopian future, but he is this absolute two-dimensional, he's the bad guy type of character.
I'm sure one day we're going to have Aeon Flux and Ultraviolet in the same show, because isn't it basically the same film?
I have not seen Aeon Flux, but I've heard about Aeon Flux, and so from what I've heard of Aeon Flux, it is very much like Ultraviolet.
Mm-hmm.
Just maybe Aeon Flux is the better version of Ultraviolet.
At least the one with the more complete backstory, because of course there was the Aeon Flux MTV animated series that was out before that. So there's history, but yeah, Toombs just felt tonally out of place with every single other character, no matter where they were in this universe.
It's a character who just doesn't work.
Nick Chinlund, and I don't think it's him per se. It's one of the things where at some point the director has to look at this and go, yeah, can you dial it back a little bit? Although I do appreciate the fact that he's a mercenary. He's a mercenary with apparently a very, Star Trek red shirt type crew where he can just go and get, a couple of extra thugs whenever he loses the last ones. You want him to be a bit more slimy and smarmy and all that. But the difference here is that you had, a really good bounty hunter, even though he didn't make it out alive in the first Pitch Black film. That performance worked really, really well. But this one just felt a little too over the top. I don't know, if and I think, remember correctly, it was James in the first one. If James had made it alive, I would have loved to have seen him here.
I just love pointing out these random connections, but James in Pitch Black, that actor also plays the bad guy in Too Fast, Too Furious, which is the only Fast and the Furious movie not to star Vin Diesel.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, it's Johns, by the way, not James. It's William J. Johns.
Johns. Yes, Johns. But yes, that actor also is the bad guy in Too Fast, Too Furious. Nick Chinlund is in a million things, a lot of them playing exactly the same character he's playing in this, or playing in, Ultraviolet, playing the smarmy, confident bad guy. But my favorite thing that Nick Chinlund has ever been in is Gilmore Girls.
I can't believe we're going from Chronicles of Riddick to Gilmore Girls, but here we are.
Yes. Nick Chinlund is in episode 2 of Gilmore Girls, where he plays the dad of one of the other girls who goes to Chilton, the prep school. I guess Amy Sherman Palladino just thought he was hunky looking and would be a nice potential romantic interest for Lorelai, even though nothing ever comes of it. There's the one scene where Nick Chinlund is another dad at Chilton who is hitting on Lorelai as she drops off Rory at school.
We've turned into a Gilmore Girls episode. Okay, no problem. That's hilarious. I love the fact that that's your reference on this one too.
Just because of my wife, I have to tie things to Gilmore Girls whenever I can.
No, you know what? I mean, trust me, I'm glad I'm not doing this podcast, say 10 years ago. Otherwise, everything would be, well, there's this voice in Paw Patrol. No,
Oh, that's my life right now, except it's gone from Paw Patrol to Blue's Clues to Coco Melon. So.
Yeah. When the scariest thing as a parent is waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and your kid is beside your bed with a remote control saying Paw Patrol. Yeah. Before coffee.
when it's this morning and it's 7 a.m. and your son is saying Coco Melon, you're like, oh, okay.
At some point, you'll be able to look at the kid and go, "Did you bring coffee? No, then no Coco Melon. No."
Exactly.
But here's the interesting thing: in the current media landscape, when you have all of these streaming services, and a lot of them are looking for franchises to build upon. I mean, you had Paramount pushing the Halo series, which I think was actually pretty well done. Prime Video right now is now pushing the Peripheral as that series, as well as the Lord of the Rings with the Rings of Power. Netflix is seemingly gutting everything that they're doing, but I mean, they had the chance to build upon the Cowboy Bebop series and whatnot. Disney Plus just pushes the everything. Is there room enough for a streaming service to pick up the rights to the Riddick franchise and to really build upon this? Like, is there an appetite for this kind of world?
I think there is. It just takes who's going to be the streaming service to pick it up, because I mean, exactly like you're saying, they're taking all these other properties that have been successful. I mean, you could put successful for Riddick in quotation marks, I guess, but there's certainly an audience out there for it. Mm-hmm. And it's just is somebody actually going to do it?
Here's hoping, because I do think, while it's a very different film from Pitch Black, it is a big story. It's a big world. And if you're a sci-fi fan, I think there's a lot to take in with this. And if given the space to be fleshed out, I think Chronicles of Riddick would make a very good series or novel series. I definitely agree with you. This is not the 20% that the critics rated this. I would actually sit there and say around the 65% audience score, I could easily see, this kind of, being in that neighborhood. And if given the space, flush out even more, I think you would see the critics actually maybe come along with better world building, but better backstory and a more flushed out environment. But it's come time. It has come time. So, who is your MVP of the Chronicles of Riddick?
As much as I want to give it to Judi Dench, just by being Judi Dench and saying yes to this movie for whatever unfathomable reason, I have to give it to Thandie Newton, because I love people taking big swings. I love people having fun with a role. I love people understanding exactly what movie they're in and just going for it. And that is Thandie Newton in this movie. That is Thandie Newton just being like, okay, so I'm in this movie that's all about this world building and all about this stuff. I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to have fun, and you have fun watching her, because she is just so capital A acting in this movie.
I can't really disagree with you. She is, for lack of a better term, delicious in this role. She's eating up the scenery. She is dancing across the screen. She is, she's so different from everyone else who's drank the Necromonger Kool-Aid here, in that she is ambitious and she is cunning, and she is using her husband and to be I can only imagine what would happen if Vaco took the Necromonger throne, which Vin Diesel sat upon at the end of the film. Spoilers. I can only imagine the continuing story of what Lady Vaco would get up to. And as much as I loved her in this, she's not my MVP. That honor goes to Linus Roach as the Purifier. There is something to be said about someone who has the wherewithal to create an iconic death moment. Like the self-sacrifice, basically he's left behind as the messenger to Riddick. He's questioning his choices, his faith, his actions. There is so much to the Purifier, and it's such a sympathetic portrayal from Linus Roach in this. Like from, the minute he's trying to convince everyone on Helios Prime to commit to the Necromonger faith, like even the way he's talking to the people, you can see there's conflict in him. As he walks out into the burning sun of the prison planet, there's such a sadness in him for not just what's ahead of him, but for everything that was from behind him. Linus Roach gave this film, some would probably say more than it deserved, but it was a glorious role. Danny Newton absolutely was a co-contender for that role, but Linus Roach, my MVP for the Chronicles of Riddick. Cullen, thank you so much for jumping on the show for the first time. Open invitation. Anytime you ever want to come back, hit me up, drop a movie, and we'll watch it and we'll dissect it. Cullen, thank you so much for this.
Thank you. I had a great time. I've recently discovered your show, and I've been very much enjoying it. So I will most definitely be back. I have lots of other ideas.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to you, our listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of It's Not That Bad. Now, you guys know the drill. If you think there is a movie out there that is unfairly maligned or just so bad that there's no way in heck that we can find anything good to say about it, hit me up on Twitter at NotThatBadcast, and we will watch it. We will dissect it, and we will find the good things to say, because we are looking for those A grades in B movies. This is It's Not That Bad. I'm Jay. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Hey folks, Stefan Shirazi and Renee Richardson here from the Metallica Report.
And we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family, where the best of music and podcasts unite.
We've got something pretty cool for you. We're giving away an exclusive Metallica merch package worth over $250.
That's a whole lot of Scary Guys, Skulls, M72, and other sought-after Metallica swag. And we've made it easy for you to win. Follow and share the Metallica Report, and you're in the game. Go to pantheonpodcast.com/Metallica, enter your email, and hit that button to be entered to win.
And just like that, you're eligible for our monthly exclusive Metallica merch package.
And guess what, rockers? You can enter every month, so just do it. And while we love our global brothers and sisters, the lawyers won't let us ship outside the U.S.